Good afternoon. I hope it's all working. I hope you're very well on this Friday. Thank you for joining me live and solo. As you can see, it feels like I'm missing something here. I've actually pulled the camera back a bit. Originally, I had it quite close on my face, but then I thought I've got so much stuff on this desk that I'd like you to see while I'm doing this. Hello to everyone who has joined already from Essex, from Illinois, from California, South California, and New Zealand and all over. Thank you very much for being here. I have actually just kept the chat exclusive to subscribers. So if you normally watch and chat and you can't chat, it's because you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel. Part of that is because I am flying solo, and I was hoping that it might help me to keep an eye on the comments while we're doing this. Back in the day when I used to do a solo live stream, there weren't that many of you. It was much easier to keep track of, maybe 30, 40 people chatting. Now it gets up to the hundreds, and it is quite difficult. I will answer this first question from Agile River before we get started, who says, does the Nikon 200mm macro lens ever show up in the used department? And the answer is yes, but very occasionally. Today, we are talking about macro because Con's not here and he hates talking about close-up photography. I'm going to turn him into a macro photographer one of these days. I promised him that. And already I've noticed it when we go out on our little jaunts and we do our review videos. Sometimes I see him getting very, very close up to some flowers or even some fungi. So yeah, it's a work in progress. As Roger said, please hit the like button on the way in. It is tremendously helpful for the live stream. And, it's a little bit daunting doing this by myself for the first time in maybe nearly two and a bit years. So yeah, I feel a bit rusty. Thank you already to Adrian for your contribution to the Coffee Fund, and to Terry for your contribution to the Coffee Fund. Thank you so much. There are a couple of people who've been in the shop in recent weeks who have given me physical cash. And usually I try and remember to write your names down when you do that. I have failed on recent occasions. When Con is back next week, I'll try and rack my brains and remember everyone. But thank you to anyone who's done that as well. And to Ian for your contribution to the Coffee Fund as well. Yeah, flowers. So as you can probably see here, I had to do this in a really roundabout way because I didn't actually have the right HDMI cable. So don't laugh. Please be kind while I'm doing this, because it's, it was a little bit of a setup. So what I've got here is I've got my Z6. It's not mine, actually. This is the shop Z6. I left mine at home. You can tell because it doesn't have the bright orange three-legged thing bracket on the base. But anyway, so I've got the Z6 hooked up via USB-C to the laptop, which is then, because I don't actually have a camera capture device at the moment. It's actually going through Zoom. So I'm going to screen share that, and then you'll be able to see what I'm doing as I'm playing with these things. But anyway, it was a little bit of a hodgepodge, but we'll get there eventually. Thank you also to Chris and to Fred, who said, do not share this with Con. I'll see what I can do, Fred. So Matt asks, how does a dedicated macro lens differ from being close up with an f1.8 or an f2? So let's just look up in the dictionary of my head what the word macro means. So macro refers to making small things look bigger. And that is a very generic kind of statement. So anything could technically, any kind of close-up photography could technically be called macro. But what it cannot really scientifically be called is micro. So when you see on Nikon's lenses, they say micro nickel. That specifically refers to when you want to make a subject life size. So what you're doing is taking, let's say, the head of a flower, as I have here, and you are projecting that life size onto the sensor. And that's essentially what micro is. So we refer to it in reproduction ratios, and you will often hear people say things like, oh, this lens shoots 1:1. That means that it is life size. 1:2 would be half life size. 1:4 would be a quarter life size, and so on. So different macro lenses have slightly different reproduction ratios, but most of Nikon's lenses, with a few caveats, have 1:1 reproduction ratio. Now, as Matt pointed out, you can be very close up with some lenses 50mm 1.8 is a great example. You can get 30 centimeters away. That means that you can really film the frame with the subject, but it's not scientific micro photography. And we're not going to worry too much about the scientific stuff today because we're just going to have some fun instead. Or at least I am. And I hope you're going to come along for the ride. Thank you very much to Jean. Good morning. And to Jeremy for your contributions to the Coffee Fund as well. So I know several of the 199 of you out there. Some of you will also be very experienced in more clinical close-up photography, where you are literally trying to reproduce an item, whether it be for archival purposes, or let's say you want to reproduce some kind of specimen life size because for science, let's just say, and put it under the broad heading of science. And obviously macro lenses are a must when you're doing something like that, but there are other ways to do it as well. In fact, some people even want to go closer than life-size reproduction. So when you get down to sort of 1 to 0.95 or something like that, you're getting closer. You're projecting the image much bigger than life-size, which is very, very exciting. I do not have a PB6, but a few people had asked if I was going to set up a PB6 today. No, I'm not. I have one coming from Japan, but I don't have it here. So what I do have, just to show you, is it's like Blue Peter, for those of you that know. Here's one I made earlier. This is a PB5. These were not as highly rated as PB6. To be honest, the PB6 is a much better bellows unit. But just to give you an idea of what, this has actually also got a slide copier on the end of it. So if you ignore that attachment there, what this essentially does is it allows you to create this distance between the end of the lens, which would go here, and your camera would go on this end. This is actually back to front for some reason. Someone's put it on the wrong. Anyway, so you would put your camera on here, your lens on here, and it creates distance between the back of the lens and the sensor, which then magnifies the subject that you're taking a picture of. I think if we do one day have a no-con Friday and I can bear it and I've got a PB6, then I will set it up for you. Or I'll do it on a separate video so I can make all my mistakes and then edit them out afterwards. But yeah, so Len said, the 100 to 400 shoots so close up, is it considered macro? So no, it's not considered a macro lens because you're not projecting that image one-to-one, but it is a close-up lens. And you can kind of call it, like, we have people who say, oh yeah, I shoot macro all the time with my 24 to 200 or my 18 to 300. That's fine. And you can call it, if you say you enjoy macro work and it's that is totally fine. But it's not a macro lens, so it won't do that reproduction ratio that we've been talking about. So Yelta, I think I pronounced that possibly correctly. Van Geest says, as most macro shots are done stop down, for example, F11, is there a real need for fast macro glass? Thinking about the 55 2.8 versus the 3.5 pre-AI, etc. So these early macro lenses is a really good question. This is just here, I've got a 55 2.8 macro. This is one of the most highly rated macro lenses for film photography. But before that came a 3.5 version, and that was the one that Nikon originally brought out. They did a 5.5 centimeter for the rangefinders, and then they did a 55 3.5, of which there are many, many versions for the Nikon F and F2, so sort of pre-AI generation. You can't really use those on later cameras because of the slight change in the mount. Those lenses were considered particularly good for reproducing articles or taking pictures of slides, for example, because they give a very sharp rendering across the frame and a kind of flat look. So so those are quite highly rated, and the aperture is not so important if you've got enough light. One thing you'll probably notice as we play around today is that even these lights, when I'm taking a picture of something like this, is not going to be strong enough really. So lighting is a big point, and someone can please remind me, I will talk about it later. So Vinny, thank you very much for your contribution to the Coffee Fund. Said 24-120 close focusing can help in a pinch, but macros are fun. And he also said there is a place for both the Z macros. I had the 50 out yesterday. So I'm one of those people, I've got both. I've had a lot of macro lenses in my time. So I had the 55 3.5 AI. So I had that for a long time, sold it, sadly. because I wanted to fund my 60 mil. So then I bought the 60 mil. I also had a 55 2.8 for a while. To be honest, I didn't have the 2.8 for a very long time. The issue with the 55s, and you'll see, although it's not very clear to see because my face is in focus. In fact, I didn't think, but hopefully my face is in focus and not this beautiful lady behind me. But on the side of the lens, it actually shows you what accessory you need in order to get 1-to-1 reproduction. So these macro lenses, the manual focus macro lenses, were 1-to-2, so half life size. And in order to make it 1-to-1, you had to add an extension tube, which I did bring. For the 55s, it was called a PK3, which then got updated to a PK13. And it is here somewhere. There we go. So that is a PK13. That's the modern version. A PK3 was a pre-AI version. So that would go on the end of your lens there and would then give you 1-to-1 reproduction. Now, the 105, which is this one here, lovely lens, needed a much bigger extension tube to get it to 1-to-1. And to be on the safe side, Nikon threw in a tripod bush on it. Why not? So it has a little tripod foot on there, but that's a PN11. I'm going to quiz you all on this at the end. I'm just kidding. But I am going to show you what these look like on the camera in a little bit. So you needed to add things in order to make them 1-to-1 reproduction. So even then you were losing light because you were adding stuff to your lenses. So in a really roundabout way of answering your question, you don't need super wide apertures for macro. Most of the time, the depth of field is too shallow to take advantage of a super wide aperture, but it's nice to have if what you're going for is a more kind of creative macro look rather than, let's say, an all in focus, everything sharp kind of look. So Fred says, I have both the 105 and the 50. I find both very useful. And as they say, horses for courses. And it's totally true. Like I've got both the 105 and the 50. The 105 is really, really useful for long distance subjects. So if you've got sort of more skittish bugs, butterflies, moths, things like that, then you're going to want a 105. Also, if you've got sort of hard to reach kind of angles, let's say you're in a forest and you can't get super close because whatever, there's like some fungi growing inside a tree or something and you can't get to it. The 105 is beautiful for that. The 50, I don't have it here, but I have it downstairs. The 50 is a much more versatile lens, I'd say. You can kind of wander around for the day with just the 50 on. And although we do point out that it is actually not super sharp for infinity, it's not great for sort of landscape work and stuff like that. The 51.8, for example, normal lens is better for general purpose, but you can't beat what it can do close up. You can't get anything like that with a normal 50. So I think it's great. Bjorn said, did you ever encounter a very seldom seen UV nickel 105? I think we've got one brand new, unopened in its box downstairs. So yes, they do occasionally appear. Another one, which a lot of people talk about. So James has just said, just acquired a 70 to 180. Ta-da! I've got one here for increased working distance and this is one of my favorite macro lenses. It is a zoom, which is very unusual. It was autofocus, painfully slow to autofocus, would not autofocus on a Z camera via FTZ. It would all be manual focus. But you couldn't get 1-to-1 with it. You had to have a special filter on the front instead of putting an extension tube on the back. And the filter was called a close-up 6T, 62 mil close-up filter. That is what you need in order to get 1-to-1 reproduction with that. But even without the 6T, that lens is absolutely fantastic. And it produces a very, I would say, even on digital, a very filmic kind of look, which is interesting. Barry says, I might have missed your earlier comment, Barry, and sorry if I did. Said, I also got the 60 mil after Becky's great slide copying video. Thank you very much. That video got me addicted to the Gray's channel. Fantastic. Yeah, I have to say there's a lot more uses for macro lenses than we'll probably be able to discuss today, but I will give you a little hint as to what you can use them for. Rob says, when I bought my F2, it came with the 55 3.5 pre-AI and a set of beautiful K extension tubes in their original leather pouch, old but lovely. Now, the K extension tubes I was going to bring up, but I've only got 2 pairs of two hands and too much stuff to carry up. But the K-rings were this little set of different types of rings that all went together, and some of them allowed you to reverse lenses and some allowed you to stack them. So ultimately you could just kind of create, it was like design your own extension tube kind of thing. And that was pre-AI compatible. So worked with the Nikon F and the F2 and any camera that allowed you to use pre-AI. There are some later ones that would let you use them. And they're a lovely little thing. We sell a set of those now for about £20 or something. So, and there are some items in that K-ring set that you can only buy in that set and you can't get them anywhere else, like special reversing rings and stuff. So Michael said, also use my 60mm from grays for slide conversion as well as for portrait. Sharp. I recently did my latest roll of scans, suppose you want to call it that, but copying negatives with the 50mm 2.8 Z macro, and I was very, very pleased. So just as good. If you're a Z user and you don't want to buy a 60mm or you don't have an FTZ or whatever, this is the old 60mm AFS, which is a brilliant lens. But if you don't want to use that, then you can absolutely use a 50 2.8 MC. Okay, so Craig's doing the maths here and saying, look, there's like 200 odd people. He says 215 minus 119, 96 likes to be clicked. So thank you for doing the maths there, Craig. Please do give us a like, us, the royal we, a like. It'd be great. John points out the extension tubes for the Z system. Yeah, so I didn't bring those up either. But if you are not a macro person, let's say you're going to do macro once in a blue moon and you're not really maybe into it as a kind of whole thing, you don't want to buy a lens, then extension tubes are fantastic. The Kenko Z extension tubes that we stock give you all the EXIF data, so you can use those with any of your Z lenses just to get you a bit closer. And essentially all you're doing, because there's no glass there, so you're not ruining the quality of your pictures or anything, is you're literally just putting distance between the camera and the back of the lens, and that creates this kind of magnification without getting too sciencey. Colin and Martin both rate the 150 Sigma really, really well. I have not used that. Albert brings up one of these. You think I didn't come with a BR2, Albert? So this little nifty thing here, which you can't really see. This is why beauty bloggers and stuff do this, to cover the face, to try. But now it's focusing on the lady behind me. Goodness me. Anyway, this little ring here, which you probably can't see, has an F mount on one side and a 52mm male thread, as they would call it, on the other side. So what you can do is take a standard lens, like a 50mm, for example, or a 35, and you would screw it onto the front of your lens like this. And then instead of using the front element to take a picture, you're attaching that to your camera. So if I put that on an FTZ, 105 is ridiculous. It's not really the right lens for this job. But essentially, if you do it the right way around, that is what you're getting. You're using the back of the lens to take the picture, and that gives you a much more magnified effect. Now, the best lens for that generally recommended is the 50. The 35 and anything wider, you're so close to the subject that you're almost inside the subject, and you can't focus with that. You have to just stick the lens at infinity and then move backwards and forwards. The main issue with something like that, obviously, is your light control. You're getting so close to a subject at that point. Sometimes you're sort of that far away. A few millimeters away, you don't get a lot of light in there. So it's very tricky to light those. And because you don't have, I mean, they even made adapters so that you could then mount lights and stuff. But it's a very, very complex thing. And don't know if it's entirely worth it, but it's a nice idea. Good morning, Ed from Mexico, who's arrived. Someone says Colin said the 180 is even better. Well, that's great. I haven't tried the 180 Sigma either, so I couldn't tell you. David says, I have the 105 MC. Not only is it wonderful macro, it's fab for headshots. My daughter shot my headshot for a book with the 105 on my Z6, and I look close to human. Amazing. It's amazing what you could do with a good lens. But yes, the 105 definitely serves a dual purpose, I would say. So Oh, hello, Joy. It's who's just clarifying that your surname's now changed, but I know it's you, so that's great. Hi, Joy. Thanks for joining this afternoon. I haven't really used, apart from the Voigtlander 65, which is their new Z macro. I actually have not used many other brand macro lenses. I don't think I've ever used a Sigma macro, but something that I might look at some point just for a comparison. To be honest, if you've already got a 105 or a 50 macro, the Voigtlander is beautiful. It's very heavy, and it's all manual focus, so you're definitely not taking pictures of moving subjects like moving insects and stuff with that, but it's a gorgeous lens. But I'd say if you've got the Nikon one, you don't necessarily need to go for the Voigtlander. If you don't have a macro lens and you want one that's beautifully made and manual focus, then that's a really great choice for you. Okay, I think I'm up to date with the comments. Thank you very much, Tim, for your contribution to the coffee fund. Yeah, so Albert points out the SBR1C1. I was going to talk a little bit later, but I'll talk about it now. So for lighting, Nikon did make a few macro speed lights, shall we say. They made a very old sort of style ring flash, which is called an SB21. It literally went over the front of your lens like this. It was a sort of rectangular ring flash, if you like, had two flashes on each side, but it was all diffused. And that went on the front, and then your power pack sat on your hot shoe. It's a little bit cumbersome, not as cumbersome as the SBR1C one. Then they upgraded it to an SB29, which was a bit more advanced and had adapters for more lenses, so you could put other lenses on there. Then they did away with the whole ring flash concept and went for the SBR1C1, where I have a video on it, a live stream on it from absolutely ages ago. So if you really want to find it, it's in there. But essentially, that would you'd mount the flash on the front of the lens. You'd have only two flashes came with the SBR1C1, but you could mount up to 6, which was a bit extreme. And then you could either fire them using your built-in flash if you had one, or a commander called an SU800. So that's one way to do it. Unfortunately, if you've got the SBR1C1 mounted on the front of your lens, you cannot then use a lot of accessories, macro accessories. Very, very difficult. You can use close-up filters, though, if you want to get that close. I've never tried to use an SBR1C1 with a bellows unit, but I can imagine that would be quite entertaining. Maybe that's something for a rainy day when I've got literally nothing else to do. Joy recently purchased a Nikon macro lens from Grays. Hurrah! Nick says both the 50 and the 105Z macros work very well with Helicon for focus shift to help with increased depth of field. Great for toadstool photography. Now, this is something I was also going to touch on, and it's great that you've mentioned it, Nick, actually, but you get such a shallow depth of field. Let me actually put this into, let me show you. I'm going to show you. Let me get that into focus and let me get my screen ready, and then you can actually see what I'm talking about. It's going to look really messy, but that right there is, if I put myself picture in picture, there we go. Here I am. So that flower, if you can see, is here, right? Now, this is with the 105 macro. So, and I'm shooting at what, 3.5? So let's just see, how close can I get? Somewhere around there. Almost, not quite. You can't see my focus point either, which doesn't really help you. But, and every vibration of the table and everything, but you can see how close I'm kind of getting and how shallow that depth of field is. So if I want all of that flower in focus, I'm really going to struggle, basically. I'm going to need to focus stack, or I'm going to need to stop down. That's at an aperture of f 4.2, which is a slightly weird aperture to use for something like that. But in order to get all of that flower in focus, I would definitely need to get kind of clever and inventive here. I wonder if I can get, no, I'm not quite at the right angle to get anything else, but you kind of get the idea with that. Now, let me switch back to me for a second, and then I will show you. I'll just give you a little talk through what I'm going to do. So first of all, we need to take the 105 macro lens off. Now, I love this lens. It is beautiful. It focuses very close. It does take a bit of time sometimes to get all the way through from the closest focusing distance to furthest focusing distance, like so over to infinity, but it does the job. I'm hopefully not going to upset my screen share when I do this, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, so then we've got the FTZ, because that is a must under the circumstances, because I don't have a DSLR here to do this whole hookup with. Okay, great. And then, for example, if we wanted to do something kind of special, I can actually do it with the 55 so that you see. So I'll show you the 55 on normally, and then I'll show you the 55 when it's reversed. Let's just get it closest focusing distance. See how far it extends out when you do that? It's amazing. There we go. All right, and now I've got my camera screen back, sort of. Okay, and here we go. So now I've put the 55 on, and that's the closest focusing distance of the 55. Very different look, isn't it? I mean, this is auto ISO and whatever. I'm not fussing too much about the white balance or anything. But you can see also from the tiny little screen share that you've got there at the top what that looks like with a 55. All right, so now, without upsetting myself, this is fun. I'm gonna reverse it, and I'm gonna show you what it looks like reversed. 55 is not too extreme with this one. It shouldn't be too bad. Now, with the BR2, there are two versions of the BR2. There's a BR2 and a BR2A. And the only difference between the BR2 and the BR2A is that one is pre-AI, and the other, that's the closest focusing distance, yeah. And the other one is AI. Now, once you've got an FTZ, it doesn't really matter. So that's reversed. So if you can just hold in your mind briefly what it looked like before compared to reversed, you see how much closer you get with it reversed. Now, if I was using a 35 mil reversed or something like that, I'd be much closer still. But you can kind of see here, if I show you that, you can kind of see the working distance has gotten a little bit closer by putting a reversing ring on. So that's exciting, isn't it? I hope everyone found that. When I'm shifting my view of the macro shots, the screen is blank. I don't know which screen is blank, but great. You can see me now, though, so that's the main thing. So that just gives you an idea of the working distance there. It gets from, like 30 centimeters to probably about 20 to, if we went really extreme and we put a 35 mil lens and we reversed it on there, then it would probably get us down to like 5 or 10 or something. J-Rod said, I got a Nikon notebook in the mail plus the magazine. Was that a gift? Yes, it was. It was for subscribing to the Nikon Owner magazine. Actually, I've written so many articles on macro photography over the 10, 12, 13 years that I've been writing for the magazine. So if you ever want to read something that is a little bit more comprehensive, then you can always subscribe and you get all the back issues included as part of that subscription. The link is in the description box, so you can find that there. So Matt says the BR2A is completely compatible with the older bodies though, right? So here's the thing. BR2A is completely backwards compatible, just like PK13 and PN11 and any of those things which were made AI, AIS. So AI and AIS generation stuff is always backwards compatible. BR2, which is what I've got here, I would not put that on a DSLR for the simple reason that because it's pre-AI, it doesn't quite have the right little indentations and it could get stuck on, you know how on your DSLR you've got sort of like a plastic coupling ring around the mount, and the BR2 and any pre-AI item, this is lenses, accessories, etc., would actually jam on that. And I have done that once before, was not fun, so I don't recommend it. Some people say, oh, it's fine, just use it anyway, and I say, if you're going to do it at your own risk. But if possible, just use AI and AIS generation accessories and lenses. David says, if you were to upload to Lightroom, would the data read for a non-AI lens on the Z camera? No, is the simple answer. There's no electronics going on here at all. Same with AI and AIS. The camera does not know, once you put that lens on, what's on it, even if it's not reversed. Excuse me. So unfortunately, you don't get any EXIF data. What you can do is set up your non-CPU lens data, which I think you may have seen. I've done that in the past. I've in the background, you've got setup menu is what it is. Non-CPU lens data. You can tell the camera what lens you've got mounted, but every time you change the lens, you have to remember to change that information because it's only as good as the information that's in it, right? Hello to Chuck and to Seth, who says, what did I miss? You missed half an hour of me talking about macro. Enjoy, Seth, enjoy. Anyway, so that is why you need to program in your lenses, basically, so that the camera knows what's going on. Obviously, you don't have to. You could just leave it and then try and remember what you shot with, but you won't get anything. You'll get shooting data, but you won't get your aperture info. And if you're using let's say an old pre-AI zoom lens, there's always the problem of which focal length do I put in so I remember what focal length I used. It's not going to read the fact that you're zooming in and out. So it's a little bit annoying, but it's okay. It's okay. So Seth is packing for Vegas, hitting the trade show to teach some classes. That's okay. It's fine. I forgive you. We've got some of the lovely Nikon ambassadors and Nikon Z creators who I met at the AP Awards last week, who some of them are going over for the Vegas, what is it? WPPI, I think is what it is, show. Anyway, that's fantastic. So that's Weddings Portrait Photographers International, I'm guessing. I'm making that up now, but WPPI, thanks, Seth. Yes, I thought so. So fantastic. When Con comes back, we can talk about portrait photography, but while he's away, we'll talk about macro. So those are a couple of options you can do. Now, obviously, I've put the 55 on here, reverse. You don't have to put a macro lens on reverse. You can literally reverse any lens at all. So that's one tool that you could use if you're not really into macro, but you kind of want to have a play around. Let's say your uncle gives you a project where he wants you to take pictures of his stamp collection, and you think it's not worth me buying a macro lens for that, but I want to get something closer. You've got extension tubes. So these guys, and they do make extension tubes with contacts, just Nikon don't. So Nikon's ones are all mechanical. Kenko are the guys that make electronic ones. There are some sort of like off-brand ones out there as well, which I will not attest to their effectiveness. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word, but anyway, it's fine. You can use whatever you want for that. I had a really old set before Kenko updated theirs. I had a really old set of some generic off-brand one. They worked fine most of the time. So that's one option. You've got your reversing ring as another option. And then the other thing that a lot of people I think dismiss is close-up filters. And the reason for that is because the close-up filters are only really as good as the glass, as the quality of the glass of the close-up filter. So if you put a really rubbish close-up filter on your very expensive portrait lens, for example, it's not really gonna do anything. It's not gonna do it any favors, that's for sure. Seth says the old 55 macro is an incredible Nikon lens. Love it, and you can grab it cheap these days. Yeah. So for example, I've got the old 55 on here. They did do an autofocus version briefly before they came out with this one, which was the 60 2.8. We had a lovely colleague, Tony, who was our macro and bellows specialist, who I learned as much as I could from. Not say everything I know, because he knew way more than I did, but I certainly learned a lot from him. And he highly rated the 60, not the G version, but because this one had an aperture ring, which meant that you could use reversing rings to control your aperture and stuff like that. That is one caveat of the reversing ring, is you could totally put a G lens on there, or a Z lens, even if you wanted to. I mean, why not? I could put a 52mm thread Z lens on here, or use step up rings, but can't control the aperture, so you're stuck at whatever the aperture is when it's off the camera. So Champagne Sumo said, are there any native Z mount macro lenses? Yes, I've got one here. This is the 105 2.8, and the other one is the 50 2.8, which I don't have with me, but both of those are dedicated Z macro lenses, and they are wonderful. Martin said, I do use extension tubes, but at times I prefer close-up filters. They do not cost light. They're not expensive, or they're not heavy. Anyway, they're more convenient, sure. So close-up filters, Nikon made a few, but they were only in 52 and 62mm size, because that was the sizes that all their lenses were at the time. simpler times when all the filters were the same size. Now you can buy them from all over the place. You can get them from, dare I say it, Amazon, Hoya make close-up filters, loads of other people. And honestly, the quality is really down to whatever the glass is. So Tortoro Porco said the 60D macro has a better manual focus feel than the G version as well. That is very true. So if you are someone who likes to manual focus, the old D lenses have quite a nice, smooth, tactile focus, whereas the G lenses, I don't really have a problem with it, but the Ds certainly feel better, particularly if they've been kept in good condition. The G I like because it was slightly sharper and slightly faster to focus, obviously, and didn't make a noise when it focused. But apart from that, the D is a very highly rated lens. Yes, Martin, there you go. Extension tubes make the picture darker. So that is the problem. When you put distance between the back of the lens and the sensor in any situation, you are going to make the picture seem a little bit darker. So that's the problem with extension tubes. Thanks, Seth. So Rishi says he's sorry he forgot to get back to you. He's been crazy busy. Likely story. Rishi busy? Never. Anyway, he is forgiven. You can tell him if you see him or speak to him. Actually, I'll message him and tell him he's forgiven. I am friend said, how is the 105 2.8G? I brought one along with me. One moment, please. Ooh. So the 105. Now, this lens is lovely. It will take teleconverters. It's the only macro lens that does. And I genuinely love the fact that it takes teleconverters because you can turn your 105 2.8 into a 200 f4 and you're good to go. The only problem is it's heavier and not as sharp as the Z. So if you've got a Z camera and you do a lot of macro, then I would definitely recommend upgrading if you can, because honestly, this lens, there's nothing beats this 105 macro. However, if you are a DSLR user or you're using, let's say, autofocus f5, f6 bodies, then this is a really, really nice option. It also has vibration reduction, which means that if you are sort of hand holding and you're doing moving subjects, VR is super handy. And as I say, the teleconverters compatibility is definitely a plus point for that one. The focus is pretty fast on the 105, even though it's like a kind of earlier generation of lens. It still focuses very, very fast. Gav points out, for anyone with only a passing interest in macro, close-up filters can give great results for minimal cost. I would say, yes, close-up filters and extension tubes. Those two things are what I would suggest if you are really just dabbling in macro work. I personally prefer extension tubes because although you get less light, not the end of the world. You can usually fix that, but also there's no glass in extension tubes, so you're not detracting from the image quality at all. In fact, sometimes you can get slightly better results by doing that. So that's what I would say. Tim points out the 200 f4 is a great macro. It is a beautiful macro. It's one that I didn't have with me today, boo, but I do have the 70 to 180 to try and make up for it. For those of you that don't know what the 200 looks like, it's kind of that size. It's a bit longer and a bit sort of slimmer in the body of the lens, but it's very, very similar in every other respect to the 70 to 180 in terms of size. And it is a beautiful lens. I really hope, and this is me just throwing a rumor out there and having no idea if it will stick, I hope that Nikon will do a 200 macro at some point in the future. Or even a 180 macro or something, but something at that longer end to complement this beautiful one. Craig said extension tubes are like $25 for a set of 3. That's Mikey or Maker. I don't know how you pronounce that, but yes, it's true. If you go for like a non-Kenko one, you can get extension tubes super cheap. So this is interesting. Albert said the 105G lens works with the SBR1C1 setup, the AFD not. This lens burns through the motor. Really? That's so bizarre, but that's really interesting to know. So I have mounted the SBR1C1. So that's the close-up flash that we were talking about earlier. I have mounted that on a 105, but I can't remember if it was a D or a G. That's Fascinating. There you go. Don't try this at home, folks. So sorry if I've missed any earlier questions. Dave, I've found a very interesting comment from you earlier. You said Novaflex make a reverse adapter for the Z mount that includes an electronic link to give full AF and aperture control. So that is interesting that you would be able to get a reversing ring that would then give you autofocus. I don't understand how that would work at all. Are you sure it's a reverse adapter? Novaflex normally make normal adapters, but they don't make reversing rings. But if so, I want to know what it is because that's really interesting. I'm just trying to think. If you reverse a lens, as you can see from this setup here, the aperture ring is at the front and the manual focus ring is in the middle and the front of the lens is in front of the camera. So I don't know how that would work, but I believe you. Craig said, I may have missed this earlier, but are extension tubes worth putting on, say, a 105 macro? Any downsides? There is no problem with putting extension tubes on a lens that is longer than the extension tube number. So like, let's say you've got an extension of 30 millimeters. As long as your lens is 30 millimeters or above, that extension tube will work. However, the longer the lens, and this is the case for a number of things, including close-up filters, the longer the lens, the less effective the extension is. So there's not really a huge point in it. You will get a little bit closer, but not a huge amount. There's a second bit to connect to the CPU, Sam says. That's very interesting. Okay, good. I wish I'd brought the Kenko extension tubes up with me. We do have them in stock. In fact, there is a set that I had to use to demonstrate to somebody, and it's now an X demo price, and it's like much cheaper than the normal ones. That's the Z extension tube set. So go and have a look at our website if you're interested in Z extension tubes. I can confirm that the Z extension tubes work with all Z lenses and even the DX lenses. There is it's a 10 mil and a 16 mil in there. And I have managed to put the 16 mil on even the DX 16 to 50 lens. So you can use them on basically every single Z lens. So no matter what lens you've got the extension tubes to have a little play with. As I say, the longer lenses, the extension doesn't do very much, but it will get you a little bit closer. If you've got a 24-70 f4 kit lens, put the extension tubes on, you've got a macro in your bag, in your pocket, because they're really, really tiny, which is great. And Sam says, SRB Photographic do adapters. They're really big on macro. So there you go if you are looking for adapters. I am looking for a new adapter, folks. This is a completely by the by, nothing to do with macro, except I do have macro lens. I'm looking for an adapter that will go Pentax 6.7, so the Takuma lenses, to Nikon Z. I want to see if someone will make it. I think K&F Concepts makes some Pentax 2Z adapters, but I haven't yet found one that does Pentax 6.7. I just think those lenses are so beautiful. I would love to try them on my Z camera. So if you know anyone that does them, drop me a word in the chat. I would be very, very happy to hear about it. That's my new pet project on the side, I have to say. So Bjorn points out that macros like 70 to 180 and the Sigma 180 3.5 retain their aperture better at close different distances. Thanks, Santa Claus. Very, very helpful. Thank you, Randall, for your contribution to the coffee fund. Very much appreciated. So I will check Photodiox to see if they've got one. I will check that afterwards. Novaflex have one. Okay. Thanks, Brian. Good. Well, that answered my question. It's quite good to get something back every so often and just ask the group what they think. So in terms of the other slightly maybe less traditional things that you can do with macro, there are some micro lenses that I haven't yet mentioned. And that comes in the form of the perspective controls. So this I've got here, I brought the 85 up with me, probably because, I don't know, I was going to bring the 45, but then I brought the 85. But anyway, the 45 and the 85 perspective control lenses are also micro lenses, which means, if those of you who joined at the beginning remember, micro means that they are one-to-one reproduction. So they do focus very close. Now, the other beauty of having it in a perspective control lens form means, let's say you were trying to do, well, we'll take the example of the flower. and you want your depth of field to be really long. Obviously, you can shift the depth of field on these lenses. So you're doing macro, let's say you're doing jewelry or something where you're going to have quite a bit of distance between the front of the object and the back of the object. This is a really good way around it. John, for example, I know that John uses those, but John says, I have the 85 PCE. It's great. Definitely a good way to do it, I would say. If you are doing lots and lots of product photography, then this is a good way to handle it. If you're kind of coming in from the DX line and you think, well, I don't want to buy like really expensive macros, Nikon do a great little 40mm DX macro for F mount, and they do an 85 3.5 for F mount. So if you're a DX user and that's what interests you, then have a look at that. I think there's probably quite a long way ahead before we get a native Nikon Z DX lens. In fact, I don't know if they would make one, because honestly, the 52.8 is the thing that would do the job, I would say anyway. So a few people are saying, so not quite 6.7, but happily use my Pentax 50 macro on my Nikon DSLRs. Interesting. Okay, good. John said have a look at photodiodes, but they're not the highest quality. Then we've got, Michael's got the 85mm macro and said it's great on the D500. And Terry uses the 40mm on his copy stand. The 40 is another one of those lenses that you can use with the slide copying adapters, so or negative converters, so ES1, ES2. Technically, you're changing the plane of focus with the PC lens, not the depth of field. Very good point, Baxter. Thank you for correcting my semantics there, but yes, you get the idea. So you're actually shifting the plane of focus so that you're getting everything in focus. It's very, very handy to do it that way, I would say. But you can also, and this brings me on to my next point, you can also, if you want to get everything in focus, you can focus stack. So I think I've touched on this briefly in another live stream at some point, but essentially what you're doing is you're taking a bunch of pictures, and Z cameras and a D850, and don't remember if the D780 has it, but definitely the D850 have this function called focus shift shooting. And what that does is, if you've got a compatible lens like an AFS lens, a lens with a motor in it, then the camera, you set your parameters of where you want it to take pictures starting and finishing and how big you want those increments to be. And then from that, you throw them into software like Helicon, or, I mean, Photoshop does it, but apparently it's not very good. But you can totally do that. And then it will squish all the pictures together. And what you get is everything's in focus from front to back. Now, I am one of those people that kind of likes I love the shallow depth of field. I love everything to be out of focus behind it. But sometimes you need it just to get the flower. I mean, these are forget-me-nots, right? So they're no bigger than maybe, the biggest one is 1 centimeter across, but barely. And if you're very, very close and you want to get everything out of focus, but you want that whole flower in focus, you might end up needing to stack just a couple of images in order to get it, but you can do it that way. The PB6 bellows is a good tool, I would say, potentially for focus stacking. Any kind of focus rail is good for focus stacking. Very, very hard to do it handheld, although I have had a few people send me handheld results, which were great. Any kind of focus rail, tripod will also work if you can just, have everything set up and you're probably not outdoors. I think that would be quite difficult. So that's another solution for you if you want to get everything in focus. What did we talk about? We talked about lighting. We've talked about focus stacking and focus shift shooting. We've got all the macro lenses. I was talking about PC lenses. Okay, Dave, I think, is answering my question. That's okay. I don't know if I understand it. I said there is an adapter for both ends of the lens. Right, so this is the reversing one, I'm guessing, linked with a cable to connect the connections from. So it can connect to the camera contacts, but would be much easier to show than explain. Sure, send me a picture, then I'll know what you're talking about. PCE lenses work well with the FTZ, John says. Yeah, so PC lenses or PCE lenses, they're all manual focus lenses anyway. So you're not losing anything by putting it on an FTZ. You can totally do that and get all your information passed through. They are CPU, which means that they have the little chips on the back, so all your data gets passed through, and they are really, really great. Thank you, Santa Claus, for sharing the link to the NovaFlex adapter. I will find that after the live stream and have a little look. That's brilliant. David says, I have the Kenko, so that's the extension tube set, for my D780. Tried it with my Tamron and it works nicely if you want to be a bit further back from the subject, but it does require that I use several of the tubes together. Yeah, so what tends to work best is wider lenses with a shorter extension. I quite like the fact that Kenko put multiple extension tubes in the set. So for the F mount set, you have 3. Not going to remember them off the top of my head accurately, but it's about like a 10, a 12, and a 16 or something. Oh no, 36 is the longest one, 24, and then a 12. That's it for the Kenkos. Nikon's ones, this is the biggest one, the PN11, then the PK13, which is 27 and a half, and then they did a PK12, which is about half of that, and they did a PK11, which is a really little extension, and I can't remember exactly. I think it's 7.5 millimeters, so it's really, really tiny. Thank you, John, for saying I'm very knowledgeable. I have a lot of this stuff in my head. Don't know if it's useful, but I hope it is. Oh, yes, that's right. Old Ahaya Angler said the links don't show in the chat unless posted by a moderator, and I can't see them either, even though I'm a moderator. So that's great. Santa Claus, you're going to have to put them in a comment afterwards, I think, once it's finished. That's probably the best thing. Have I tried extension tubes with the PC85? Can you get one-to-one results, as the PC85 is 1:2? It's a great question, Turn R. I have not tried extension tubes with the PC85. Our good friend in the chat, John Hughes, might have done, because he has extension tubes and may well have done that. Obviously, it's an F mount, so in theory, you could put an extension tube on there. Minimally, I would say about a 30 millimeter extension to get you to 1:1. Just thinking focal length versus size of extension. If you look, this is the extension tube needed for a 55, and this is the extension tube needed for a 105. So it kind of needs to be somewhere in the middle of there to get you 1:1. But you could get pretty close to it with one or the other of these, I would say. So this is a 52.5 millimeter extension, just to give you an idea. So I'm just thinking like focal length and extension tube, it would be, I reckon, about a 30, maybe a 40 mil extension would get you to 1:1. And you can stack the extension tubes as well to kind of get to the desired length that you want. John says he hasn't tried it, but he will for next week. That would be great. Now, if no one's got any other questions about macro, I just wanted to recap that next week we are going to conclude our film photography challenge. If you haven't sent us at least a picture taken on a film camera, obviously for those of you that don't shoot film, don't worry, we'll do another challenge. But if you would like to send over pictures, Con and I are going to go through them sometime when he comes back between now and next Friday's live stream. You can send the pictures over to media@graysofwestminster.co.uk. I got that right. That is the email address that's in the description box as well. I know, John, you don't have a film camera. So I know, but for the next challenge, we'll make it something where everyone can give it a go. And we're going to go through the pictures and talk a little bit about film. We've been shooting some different film stocks recently. Some I like, some I don't like. So I will probably be very brutally honest about the ones that I've enjoyed recently. And that's what we're going to do. If you find the macro stuff interesting and you want me to do another one, I know a few of you want me to put the bellows on. As I say, that I think would be incredibly stressful, but I can give it a go once I've got the PB6 in hand, which I should have very soon. David suggests we send John a rangefinder. I don't know, John, if you'd like a rangefinder, to be honest. Not after all this time. Matt says, I've heard one of the manual focus 20mm was specifically designed to have great optics when reversed for macro. Actually, I don't know if it was the 20mm specifically, but there are a few lenses that are particularly good when reversed. In fact, the enlarging lenses, weirdly, the little 50 EL Nikkor, which was an enlarging lens, when reversed, was considered one of the most sharp lenses, but only reversed, which I find so bizarre because you would think you'd want a sharp lens for enlarging. Anyway, I read lots of articles which mentioned that. So yeah, we will do a new challenge, a new photo challenge. If you've got a film camera lurking around that's got a couple of shots left in it and you think you're going to get them developed and scanned by next week, then just send them over. I think our email only handles up to 10 megabytes, so don't go crazy. Don't like completely spam our inbox, but 1 or 2 photos at the most. We've had some people who've sent some really, really lovely stuff. A couple of people sent more than one shot, and that's fine too, but we'll probably only show one in those cases. Nigel is guessing, but this is a fair statement, said if you use extension tubes with the PC85 and use tilt, you may run out of image circle. And that's a good point, because obviously this lens tilts, right? So it is entirely possible that that might happen. David sent it to the wrong email. Well, that's okay. If you sent it to info@Grays, it will get to us as well, because we've got people that know where to send things on to, so that's not a problem. Matt said, looking forward to the next installment. Becky teaches Con 1-to-1 macro. Well, I don't know that Con will be looking forward to that. Red says, tomorrow I'm going to Venice, to the Venice, Florida Audubon Society rookery to shoot many varieties of birds in their mating plumage, which is very rewarding photography. This has been brilliant. Fantastic, Fred. Well, I hope you get some great shots with your 100-400 or whatever lens you're taking there. Thank you very much to Henry for your contribution to the coffee fund as well. That was tremendously appreciated. As I say, any other questions? If there are techie questions for people that are catching up afterwards, you can pop them in the chat, in the comments, and I will do my best to go through them. We do get a lot of comments each week, so I don't answer all of them, and sometimes it's Con that answers them and stuff, but I'll do my best on that. And I think I'm just wondering if there's anything else that I missed. No. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I really appreciate your company. I hope that even if you don't like macro photography, you found it useful. And when we go out and do our little shoots and you see me getting up close and personal to some flowers or some fungi or whatever, you can stick up for me and tell Con to leave me alone. No, just kidding. And all of this equipment came from Grays, as you can probably tell. So if you are in the market for a macro lens, then you can always get in touch with us and we'll be able to help you out with that. We've got extension tubes and all kinds of other bits and pieces too. Have a great weekend all. Thank you for being so kind, and I will see you next week. I'll see you with Con next week for a Nikon report. We'll be back on we'll probably go out on Wednesday for a Nikon report. There is a video going out this weekend, a little review that we did a few weeks back that I've now uploaded, and we'll see you for a live stream. Thank you so much. Goodbye.